Welcome to this DMin proposal presentation. My name is Dick Mathisen, and this is a hoped-for preview of my doctoral dissertation. So that's me, Pastor Richard Mathisen, and the conflict between modern science and the Christian faith is my topic, and this presentation will be very simple, but also complex. I will explain it very simply at first, and then add complexities later. So the conflict between modern science and the Christian faith is the most important problem facing Christianity today. And the conflict is a very serious conflict, and it's primarily about the acceptance of miracles. Modern science does not accept miracles. Christian faith is based on a miracle, the resurrection of Jesus. Resolving this conflict scientifically requires a scientific framework acceptable to both sides. I intend to provide such a framework. I will use Wolfhart Pannenberg, theologian, and Ian Barbour, a philosopher, to represent the two opposing positions. Barbour, that science refuses to accept miracles; Pannenberg, that Christianity must be able to defend the resurrection of Jesus scientifically. And I will propose an innovative scientific framework using a standard scientific technique known as the null hypothesis. The null hypothesis. Standard science, this is an oversimplified view, but a scientist proposes a hypothesis H1, like X causes Y, tests the hypothesis against the null hypothesis, always called H0. The null hypothesis is that there is no connection. That's the null hypothesis, no connection. And here is how I'm going to use it. My positive hypothesis, H1, is that the resurrection of Jesus really happened. And the null hypothesis, H0, is that the resurrection of Jesus did not really happen. Focus for a moment on the null hypothesis. If modern science refuses to accept the possibility of the resurrection of Jesus, a miracle, science is also making a positive claim that the resurrection did not happen. To put it bluntly, science claims that belief in the resurrection of Jesus is a delusion of some sort. Well, how can we possibly test these two hypotheses? And we'll test them against the facts of history, the entire history of civilization. This is a timeline of civilization for Bible purposes from 3000 BC to 2000 AD. It starts with the invention of writing in 3000 BC, 3,000 years up to the birth of Jesus, and then another 2,000 to today, 2024. So that is the timeline of civilization. You can also see there from 1000 BC to 0 is the Old Testament being written. Okay, and that's 3000 BC there to year 0 to today. And we'll test these two hypotheses by their implications. I'm keeping this very simple at first. And the first piece of historical evidence is the extraordinary growth of Christianity. In the year 0, when Jesus was born, the number of Christian believers was 0. Now, by 100 AD, it was 8,000. By 200 AD, it was 150,000. By 300 AD, it was 3 million. And that's when the Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity. And then by 400 AD, it was 30 million. These are scientific estimates. And that growth rate is extraordinary. And in 391, Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire with a huge impact for over 1,000 years. So that's the growth for the first 400, and that numerical growth continued at an extraordinary rate. And today, world religions, there are 7.6 billion people, and Christians are 2.38 billion. That's about 31% of the world. Islam about 25, Hinduism about 15, Buddhism about 5, and Judaism about 0.2%. These 5 religions are considered to be the 5 world religions, and there they are. Okay, now back to our 2 scientific hypotheses. H1, the resurrection really happened, or the null hypothesis, H0, that it didn't really happen. Keep your attention on the null hypothesis. We said if modern science refuses to accept the possibility of the resurrection of Jesus, which it does, that refusal is also making a positive claim that the resurrection did not happen. Or more bluntly, science claims that belief in the resurrection of Jesus is a delusion of some sort. That's very important, this null hypothesis. Modern science claims, in effect, Jesus was not resurrected. But if Jesus was not resurrected and Christian belief is a delusion, then that delusion is perhaps the most successful delusion in the history of the world. We know for sure one of these 2 hypotheses is correct. Jesus either was or was not resurrected. We have 2 hypotheses which can be tested separately against the evidence of history. And the question, which hypothesis offers the best explanation of the historical evidence? This approach will be totally scientific. It's not about faith. Because it's scientific, both hypotheses can be seriously considered by scientists, and both hypotheses can also be seriously considered by Christian believers. I've tried to keep this very simple so you can see where I think I'm going. And in a minute, I'll be adding some complexities. But what's the underlying issue? And it's a clash of presuppositions. The presupposition of the Bible is expressed in the first 10 words. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, Genesis 1:1. The Bible presupposes an extremely powerful creator God, fully capable of accomplishing a miracle. Nothing in modern science proves or suggests that such a creator God is impossible. The presuppositions of modern science is to never accept miracles as scientific evidence. This is a methodological assumption, but it is only an assumption. It assumes no powerful creator God exists, but offers no scientific evidence for that. Assumptions are dangerous. They can make an ass of you and me. And for scientific investigation purposes, science assumes no higher power, which is reasonable. That's a definitional assumption, not based on evidence, because the existence of a higher power is not testable. So what is the problem? The assumption of no higher power, used repeatedly, can start to be taken as a fact, and that is what's happened, especially in the social sciences. So assumptions are dangerous. Additional complexities. One piece of evidence supporting the resurrection of Jesus is that extraordinary growth, and I'll add 2 more pieces of scientific historical evidence. The perfect fit between the Old Testament and the New Testament, and the resurrection appearances of Jesus recorded by Paul in his undisputed letters. The perfect fit between the Old Testament and New Testament is important because Jesus needed 3 things as preconditions for his mission: monotheism, morality, and the concept of a Messiah. The Old Testament was revolutionary because it introduced the concept of monotheism to the world. It also brought in an egalitarian morality. love your neighbor as yourself, as well as the concept of a Messiah. And all three concepts were critical to the mission of Jesus. They provided the perfect fit. The perfect fit between the Old Testament and New Testament is important because Jesus needed these three things as preconditions for his mission: monotheism, morality, and the concept of Messiah. An additional argument is Paul's testimony about the resurrection appearances. Paul says Jesus, quote, appeared to more than 500 of the brothers and sisters, most of whom are still alive, though some have fallen asleep. He is challenging any Corinthians who doubt the resurrection to come to Jerusalem and speak to the eyewitnesses. Paul is convinced. So we have three separate historical arguments in favor of the resurrection: the extraordinary growth, the perfect fit between the Old and New Testament, the resurrection appearances in Paul's undisputed letters. Now, a word about a simplifying assumption about miracles. What about other miracles in the Bible? Because there's no way to test the other miracles scientifically, they will be ignored for purposes of this project. The resurrection of Jesus is different because there is scientific historical evidence that can be brought forward to test it. Other conflicts between science and the Bible. There are other conflicts between modern science and the Christian faith, such as serious discrepancies between the Bible and biblical archaeology, especially about the Exodus, or human evolution from a different creature. Christian believers can and should be willing to accept provable findings of modern science without necessarily accepting the presuppositions of no miracles allowed. The summary. The project will establish a scientific framework for evaluating the historical reality of the resurrection of Jesus using two scientific hypotheses: the positive hypothesis H1, that the resurrection really happened; the null hypothesis H0, that the resurrection of Jesus did not happen. The goal is to demonstrate that the resurrection of Jesus does not violate modern science, properly understood. The main innovation is the use of the null hypothesis. The null hypothesis that the resurrection of Jesus was a delusion requires accepting a huge number of coincidences that just happen to fall into place perfectly. That's my presentation. There's a bibliography of the books of Tannenberg, Barbour, and F. Leron Schultz. And thank you very much.